Well, hello and welcome back to Alfa Technics. You join me in the garage today and I've got a new mini project, and this will be the first of a number of episodes on this subject, and it's actually going to be on carburetor. So I've got a pair of carburetors. These are Dellorto's DHLA 48mm, and I've never used them and I probably will never use them, so I'm going to be stripping them down and rebuilding them. So you're going to be able to follow me in the process of how I do this. This is on the back of a couple of strong videos that I produced over the last couple of years. One was on how to tune the Dellortos, the 40mm Dellortos that are on my Alfa, and that's how to set the idle jets correctly and tune it according with three different methods. One is a hose pipe method, where you put a hose pipe to your ear, listen to the thump, thump, thump of the cylinder and listen to the air going in. The second method I was demonstrating in that video was using a thermal gun on each of the cylinders on the exhaust manifold and comparing the temperatures. What you're trying to achieve is a consistent temperature across all four. And the third one is using a Gunson colour tune as well. The second video was actually about balancing carburetors on the Alfa. That's a stage one of the before you actually do the idle jet tuning. So anyway, let's get into this video now. I'm going to reset the camera. You'll probably join me from that side, and you'll be looking at down onto my work table here. We're going to be looking at the tools that we're going to be using. I just need to reset my light and away we go. So here we are. We have a set of tools in front of us that we're probably going to be using for this activity. There might be one or two other things I might need to draw upon, but we've got flathead screwdrivers, a hammer and a small punch. We've got an Allen key, some circlip pliers, and then also a 11mm ratchet. Okay, I'm going to move these tools out the way now, and we'll take a closer look at the carburetor. So for the purpose of the video, I'll only be stripping down one of the twin carbs. But you can see this would be the setup as it would be stored in the car. We obviously have the air coming in from this side. So this is the engine side. This is where the inlet manifold would be. Behind here, the connection between the two is the balance screw, which is in the middle here. And you can see that is a simple blade that opens the throttle's butterfly valves when the throttle cable is pulled upon, or when you put your foot on the floor, it pulls the throttle cable, which runs through from this side, in this example, through these Mayguard aluminium throttle linkages tuned to the spring. They'll be fitted to here, and when it's pulled upon, it opens up like so. So we'll take the one away. We're going to take this one away here. This is actually a twin. This is actually a match pair. So the small identification here on the label here, very delicate, but an aluminium plate that says R5254. On this one is R5255. So that's a matched pair. That's just the serial number for the actual carburetor when it comes out of the factory. They are original. They are made in Italy. They try and avoid the Spanish versions, and they are copies of the original Italian versions, but they're just not the same. I might be stand corrected on that one. Okay, so basic principles we'll go through step by step during this process. As we go through the strip down, I'll explain all the individual components, but essentially the theory behind it is a fluid dynamic, or a principle using a Bernoulli effect. Inside here there is a choke, so there's a narrowest point, there'll be a choke. We'll find out what size that is when we look at it in further detail. So there'll be, each cylinder has its own choke in there. You just about see the chokes sat there. And as air rushes in, it increases in speed because the choke is actually narrower when the throttle butterfly opens. Okay, these are 48mm Dellortos, so the throat across there and there should be 48mm. So yes, there's one choke per venturi. This is an effective venturi, so air's rushing in, it sucks in, it increases, and it gets sucked into the cylinder as the piston pulls it into the chamber. I'm no expert in carburetors, but what I'm trying to show across here is that for those who don't understand what all the components are, when we get into the internals, there'll be some jets, emulsion tubes, and so on and so forth, all of different sizes. We expect to see the same sizes on each side and across all four. It'd be unusual to see the different sizes. It certainly wouldn't be correct. This is the cable for the choke. So on cold start, an engine could be using choke. Because in most cases choke is never used, these carburetors, cold starting is usually preceded by a partial pump of the throttle. On classic cars, before you start the car, you pump the throttle 2 or 3 times, because there's a delay in the fuel filling up the float chamber. That's why you should allow the fuel pump to run for 5 to 10 seconds at least before you turn the ignition on and start the engine. Once that fuel level is increased, then you're about ready to be able to then pump the throttle 2 or 3 times just to get some fuel into the cylinders. Once the engine's actually started, just feather the throttle to make sure that the engine stays alive and keeps the engine going until it's able to idle. Chokes just don't seem to get used because it is so easy to use the excellent accelerator pump system fitted in these carburetors instead. One thing to note is that if you are using a choke, it's possible to unconsciously know that the return spring may not have closed, leaving just a small amount of the choke still open, and that can lead to something called bore wash or cylinder wash. That's where the excessive unburnt fuel in the cylinder can wash past the rings, your oil rings and your piston rings, and actually contaminate the oil, and that leading to bearing failure. So pull your dipstick out and smell the oil in it. If it smells of petrol, then change it immediately. So let's start stripping this down. First we're going to take off the Mayguard throttle linkage mounting. So I'm going to go in here, got the screw and the washer, one more there, and the final one here. Okay, with that exposed, I can see some of the crud that's built up here in the years. As I mentioned before, I haven't actually used these carburetors. I bought them with the intention to actually put them on my Westfield, but I soon learned that just upping the size of the carburetor doesn't actually mean you get more power. It's more to do with the jetting of the actual carburetor itself and the choke size, which is more important. Certainly if you're going to be able to use the car on a drivable basis. One thing you might notice is that the shortness of these trumpets on here is very short. These are used for higher RPM, so the shorter the trumpet, the higher RPM the application. So these might well have been used in a racing vehicle. The longer the trumpet, the more torque that you'll achieve in your car. So there are over the years there have been loads of experiments to see the differences, and some crazy videos on YouTube with about 3-foot trumpets coming out of them to see if they make any difference on the dyno. First thing to notice is that if we just draw a line down the middle, you almost get a mirror image of one side of the carburetor to the other side of the carburetor. That's intentional. What's going on under here is the float chamber, which is a Siamese. It is unique to one set of twin carbs. So first of all, we're going to look at the idle mixture adjustment screw. So one is here, okay, and then one here. And these are needles, and once you screw them in, you screw it in to make the mixture more lean, and you screw it out to make it richer. There is a sweet spot when you're tuning. You'll notice that video that I did on tuning my carburetors in the Alfa. I'll put a link in now. The next is the pump jet screw cover. That'll be under here. Then we have the progression hole screw cover, which is here. Again, one this side and one that side. And then the main jet and idle jet cover is actually this bit here. So the main jet and idle jet are under here. We have the throttle arm adjustment screw to look at. So that's basically would be here. There'll be the screw's not in place, but it would be here, and it opens the arm. So as we screw down here, it just allows the throttle arm adjustment on the carburetor. So right now I'm going to remove the very short trumpets that are installed on this Dellorto. So there's 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 on each side. And one there. Okay, let's keep all the things together. Nuts, bolts and screws. We will begin to lay these out in front of us. I shall try and keep my desk tidy. So these chokes are now inside the carburetors. They look pretty corroded in there. I haven't had a happy time being in storage. So now we need to remove them by the fixing here. There's one. Doesn't want to come out yet, a bit tight. We'll just remove the other one. We've got a lock nut. So I've been trying to get these 2 chokes out, and I've come to a bit of a conclusion that I'm actually going to stop trying to attempt, because actually in fact that they've been in there such a long time, and they're actually corroded, and both the materials have almost bonded themselves together. But I've removed everything I can which hold them in there, and both the chokes are solid. So they might take a bit of persuasion. We'll have a go at taking a look at that again later in this strip down, and we'll move on to something else. One thing I'd like to just note, in fact, if I can just about see it, they are 40mm chokes. But what we'll do is we'll continue stripping down this carburetor. I'm just going to go again through the overview of some of the components. So here we go. So here we have the idle adjustment screw here, 1 and 2, one for this side and one for that side. Then we have the pump jet screw cover, which is here. The progression hole screw cover is here, and the main jet and idle cover is in fact here. So this is what we're going to take off now. 3 of the screws have already been removed. This is the final one here. And take the cover off. I'm putting all my screws to one side. You'll see we can now expose very carefully the float chamber and the float. That is quite poorly corroded in there. I've actually removed one of the jets in there at the moment. That is in fact, I'll come back and I'll tell you what they all are in there, but one of them I've already removed. So put that to a side. So what we have in front of us is the cover, the idle jet, main jet cover, and a small little breather which I can remove on the top here. Conveniently those screws are already loose. We'll take that off. Okay, small little gasket that can be replaced. That needs to be cleaned up. Here's our choke, linkage and mechanism. And underneath is what we call the float. There's my needle that's popped out, and seat. I'll just leave it back in there. So the floats are located under the carburetor cover on both the carburetors. And as the chamber fills up with fuel, that float will then begin to rise and shut off the flow of fuel that's coming through here. And there's this little needle that sits there. And that is adjusted. There is a specification that's adjusted actually by gently bending these down to its lowest position for float height setting purposes. On Weber's, Weber uses brass and then latterly plastic, and Dellorto's only use plastic only. To allow more petrol to come into the float chamber, the floats will drop down, which then opens essentially this small needle which allows fuel to flow in through here. Again, the flow of fuel is under pressure, this by the electrical fuel pump or even mechanical fuel pump, and that's normally on these carburetors about between 2.5 to 3.5 psi. Very low pressure. I'll remove the needle. This needle has a little spring operator in there, and what that does, it actually essentially acts as a seat. So it sits there, and as the fuel comes in, the chamber fills up with petrol and then closes that tap in essence. I'm not going to talk about how we set the height, but this does need to be adjusted quite carefully. I will be replacing this with new gaskets. I have a gasket set that I can do, but what we have to do is, with caution, we must carefully remove the float fulcrum bars. So here we have a fixed fulcrum bar. This one's actually got a split in it. That's designed to have a split in it, and the pin that holds the float in there will go one way or the other. It'll only go one way. It's possible to break the cover casting through rough handling, and then it'll be rendered useless. So caution must be taken when we do this. Now I'm going to remove this brass needle and seat from here. There we go, and together along with a small washer. So I'll just span the camera around so we can take a closer look at this small mechanism here. So on closer inspection, I can actually see that we're missing a vital part. Now this has actually been broken off in the past, and that is substandard. So I may have to replace the floats in this carburetor, because I will not be able to fix this here unless I can solder something on there and make it work. There should be a lug here which comes out, and as that drops down, it actually acts as the fully open position. So when the float comes down, the chamber's at empty or at its minimum. It actually stops it from flapping right down in here. So what there should be is a lug which sits like that in the screwdriver, and that will come, and that stops, and that rests against the actual needle and the seat. So we are missing this, which has been broken off in the past, which is a shame, but we'll continue to remove this pin now, as we need to eventually put the new gasket on, So we'll get the vise. And see if we can push this out without damaging it any further. Best way I found to remove the pin is actually use a circlips here, circlip pliers, which is just the right size for the pin, and with a gentle persuasion with a hammer I'm just going to ease that through, pushing it all the way through, and then just gently all the way removing it out like so. And we can see now that the pin has been, well, it's halfway out. I have now been able to remove the pin all the way out, so we have our float. Put that in our box, put that aside, put a pin aside, take the gasket off, that'll probably go in the bin, and now we have our top cover. I'm just going to remove the cold start tap screw, which is on the top here, and oh, there's something missing in there. There should be a spring in there which allows the cold start piston valve to return. But I'm now going to remove the remainder of this cold start assembly. You'll see that the piston moves up and down within the housing. So we've got to go in here and remove the nut. I've got an 8mm socket. There's the nut. I've got a small washer to remove here, along with the retaining washer. The spring, there's a return spring. This is called the drive link. This is what the cable attaches to. And here this looks like some sort of retaining nut that we need to remove now as well. So I'm going to remove this. I think I might have to get my circlip pliers on here. Oh yeah, that's not too bad, that's a bit loose. Just remove that sleeve, and out comes the shaft as well. Very delicate little shaft, and that rotating movement transfers the motion to up and down. Quite neat with this small spigot. The cold start piston valve should now pop out. There it is. So that's that small little assembly there. All these parts can be reused. I'll clean them up. And this now is the casting that's ready to go into the ultrasonic wash, which I'll put to one side for now. We can turn our attention to the main body now of the carburetor, and we'll start to look at the emulsion tube holders, which in turn hold the emulsion tubes. I'm just going to grab my flathead screwdriver, take these out. Main jet air corrector 1 and 2. You can remove those. These have small markings on them, a number of holes that you see down the sides. This is the Dellorto main jet emulsion tube and emulsion tube holder. So the emulsion jet is at the end, emulsion tube and the holder at the top. They do have markings on. You can see the marking on this one is at 165. Individual markings on all of them. We've got also markings on the emulsion tube as well, just there. We should always make sure that the markings are all the same on each. So this is definitely the same. So it's 165 on there, 165 on there. And all the holes should line up as well. So we've got 7772.8 on that one, and 772.8 8 on that one too. I'm going to put those in the tank to get washed and cleaned up. Next we're going to remove the idle jets. So again, we've got one idle jet for each combustion cylinder. One here. One here. And these two will have markings on them as well. Again, very dirty. One's cleaner than the other. But again, you have markings at the end here. That refers to the size of the hole, the jet at the end. So these two will get cleaned up. And new seals, new rubber O-rings there that perished as well. They'll go into my cleaning tray. Next we're going to remove the idle screws. And their springs. These are very delicate because these needles should be relatively sharp, but again that's very dirty. Seen quite a lot of action and not much cleaning and servicing over the years. A little washer, small washer there. Put that in there, and there might be a small O-ring as well there that needs to pop out. We're going to be replacing all the O-rings in here as a matter of course. Another one here. That should pop that all together. That assembly there. Good. I'm going to now remove both of the progression tap screws, which are these here. One there. This exposes all the progression holes under here, and you can see there's 3 progression holes on this particular carburetor. You can have up to 5, I believe, and some people even put more in there manually. Should be both on the same side. Yes, there's 3 in there too. You'll see the top of the butterfly just moving over the edge. So as the butterfly opens, the progression holes open up, allowing air in. Okay. I'll go in my parts to clean up again. Next to come out is the pump jet holder. Just here. Both sides. There's one there. See, there's the pump jet that slides up and down. Small fibre washer there. And again this side. Pop out. Clean those up. And then here next are the cap screws. Take this out. These two are the bypass screws. I'm going to remove these. These are always important when you're tuning to make sure these are fully screwed in, otherwise they will bypass through the carburetor on there. There, the airflow bypass screws, one there. This here I'm referring to is the pump jet spacer rod, and then below it is a small ball bearing, so I don't want that ball bearing to fly out. I'm going to be very careful when I remove this cap off. I've got one here in the centre. There you go. Oh, that's really corroded in there. I think this carburetor must have had a lot of fuel just standing stagnant in there, so it's going to take a lot of cleaning up. This is quite a challenge. Let's see if that ball bearing will come out. It may not. There's even one in there. Sometimes they do go missing, and there's a good chance there might not be in there. I haven't found it. It didn't come on the end of that, did it? No. No, so maybe that ball bearing has got lost in the past. It's easier for people to remove these and they don't realise that it's in there. So remove these two cap heads here, one there and the other one there. I'm going to have a good peer down there now to see if they can see anything. Nothing's falling out. There's the rod. I'll flip the Carby over now and we're going to look at the pump housing. So there's 4 bolts on here to remove the pump housing, and also this linkage in here that attaches itself to the spindle. A small spring there. This will all have to be removed as well, as we're going to comprehensively clean this up. I'm taking a 6mm socket, undo that knot, just break that off, the adhesion, unscrew, and then we're down to a lock nut. Well, that was the lock nut, and now we've got the main piece. It's unwinding itself nicely. That's now unwinding itself. Remove that, please. And that exposes the rod, so we can now remove the rod afterwards. I'll take the pump cover off now. There we go, 4 bolts. So we have the pump diaphragm sits underneath here. I'll pop off in like so. We're going to go in here and remove the pump housing. Set those bolts down to there, and now this should be persuaded to come off with a bit of luck. Be very gentle, maybe a little tap. There you go, and off it comes. And that is the pump. Okay, the pump cover, the pump housing. I'm at the stage now where we can start to look at removing the butterflies and the spindle via the 2 nuts that are on the end. There are 2 retaining nuts. There'll be 2 bearings in here, one side here, one side there. It's not, the bearings don't need to be frequently changed, but in this case, I don't know the history of this carburetor, and also it does feel notchy. It's not smooth. It feels also a bit gritty in there, so you can just see the movement there. It's notchy. They are due for replacement in that case, and these bearings will be worn out. On Dellorto, the solution to grittiness in the bearings, the action is to remove the spindle nuts and remove the throttle arm, which cover the exposed side of the bearings. Using a screwdriver, I shall remove the butterflies. Use the screwdriver to begin removing these small screws on either side. I might need to get some. What I might do there is to, and again this side, this spindle is steel and you can get brass ones, but the brass ones tend to be a softer material. They can actually twist, like whilst one side of the butterfly might be shut, the other side might be slightly open, which then gives you an air leak, and then you'll feel it in the performance of the carburetor and the engine. So a lot of people swap the brass shafts, spindles out for steel ones like this one here. Now this should slide out. I've now been able to release those butterflies, so they come out fairly easily with a bit of manipulation, persuasion. Small wooden dowel from the other side just knocks them out. Okay, so put those to one side as well. And we'll clean them up. They'll be nicely polished. I'll go into my cleaning tray again. I'm going to remove this central, what to call it, bracket here, which mechanism for the pump. Just rotate this screw holding it in. The good thing about recording this whilst I'm doing it is that it's a safe measure of understanding where they all go back together again once it's been completed. So that's a little bit tight on there. Again, we'll just use the hammer just to knock that off there, and it should be easy to remove. The important thing will be when we put this back together is at the right angle. Taking photographs along the way, recording it as part of a good measure. And it's off. Okay. Now we shall remove these nuts that hold the spindle on. So there's a small lug there. We'll tap that out with a punch and a hammer. It might be easy to just push it out. There you go. Using a 12mm socket, I'm going to take the nut off. There's the lock washer. Come off next. Need to remove the throttle arm now off the spindle. A bit tricky, which then exposes the bearing underneath. Now you see there's a small washer to remove. And there's the sealed bearing. So these bearings, let me see if I can read it out, are 607 RS. 607 RS, there'll be two of those. And what's the manufacturer on here? IKS. IKS, so there'll be two of those, one on either side. I'm just going to remove the other side now. Again, push over the little lugs. One. And two. Enough to get the spanner on there, the ratchet. Just to break the nut off. Remove the lock washer, like so. Where did that go? Over there. Now the throttle arm, and again exposing that bearing underneath. Excellent. I'm going to put all these components again for part wash. I'll come back to them at a later time. What's left to do now is to remove the spindle shaft. So I'm holding the carburetor in my vise. I've got a cloth around it just to protect it. I'm going to tap through now the spindle in one direction. Sometimes if they are tight, you might have to add some heat into the aluminium casting around here, but I think it should come through. So I'm going to just tap it gently. Now with, say, the bearing's already come out at the other end, I need to take a punch, the right size punch. And you see the spindles coming out now. I can now remove it from the jaws and all the way out. And there's one of the bearings, and that should just also come off there. And there's the spindle. I now need to remove this bearing just from the other side. I can just see a little ledge exposed there. And just lightly tap from this side, and the bearing's making its way out. With both the bearings out now, I should be able to replace those when it comes to reassembling. We'll go back and see if I can get these chokes out. So there's one in each venturi. There's one. There's two. You can see inside there that's the auxiliary venturi. I'm not going to remove those. They do seem pretty solid and I'm not going to force them out. So they're happy where they are. This will go for cleaning now. And I'm going to leave it there for this part one. The next time you'll see me, I'm going to be cleaning up these components. This will hopefully come up nice and bright in the ultrasonic cleaner. So I'll show you the process of ultrasonic cleaning and the fluid I use to get this nice and clean. So thanks for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe, and see you soon.